For 40 years, Iran told its military commanders, its engineers, its soldiers, and most importantly, itself, one thing: go deep enough, and nothing can touch you. And for 40 years, they weren't wrong. Think about what Iran actually built down there. Not a bunker, not even close. We're talking about an entire industrial civilization, hidden underground. Missile assembly plants running 3 shifts a day beneath mountain ranges. Centrifuge halls spinning uranium to weapons-grade purity inside chambers carved from living rock. Fuel processing lines, engine test facilities, command centers wired into every corner of the country. Connected, redundant, self-sustaining. The Fordo enrichment plant alone, the crown jewel, sat 80 to 90 meters inside solid limestone, the same material that makes up some of the hardest rock formations on Earth. The centrifuges spinning weapons-capable uranium were buried deep enough that the mountain itself was the armor. Iranian engineers called it untouchable. Western analysts called it a nightmare. They were both right. And here's the thing about Iran's strategy that most people miss. This wasn't paranoia. This was a doctrine built on one foundational premise: that depth equals immunity. That if you bury something deep enough, if you pour enough concrete, blast enough tunnels, stack enough mountain above your most valuable assets, the laws of physics become your ally. Because even the most advanced air force in the history of human warfare has limits. There is only so far a bomb can reach. Iran spent 40 years, and somewhere in the range of tens of billions of dollars, building that argument into the physical landscape of their country. And for 40 years, the argument held. Every time Israel threatened to strike, every round of sanctions, every Security Council resolution, every ultimatum, the mountains absorbed the pressure, the centrifuges kept spinning, the missile cities kept expanding. On a runway in the middle of Missouri, a state most of the world couldn't find on a map, 4 aircraft were doing something that had never been done before in the history of warfare. They weren't announcing it. There were no press briefings, no satellite phones lighting up, no leaked memos. The crews had been in mission planning for days. They knew the target packages. They'd flown the simulations until the routes were muscle memory. The B-2 Spirit is unlike any aircraft that has ever existed. It has no tail, no vertical stabilizer, no conventional fuselage. From above, it disappears against the sky. From below, radar waves don't bounce back. They scatter, absorbed, dissipated by a skin coated in materials that still carry classification markings. When it flies, it doesn't roar. It doesn't announce itself. It simply appears over your country, and then your country is never the same. That night, each of those 4 B-2s carried something in their internal weapons bays that made the aircraft themselves almost secondary. The GBU-57, the massive ordnance penetrator, 30,000 pounds, 13,600 kilograms, a bomb so large, so heavy that only one aircraft on Earth is certified to carry it in combat, the B-2. Each aircraft carries exactly 2, 1 per bay. The bomb is longer than a city bus. Its casing is machined from a specialized high-density steel alloy designed to survive the impact of hitting rock at terminal velocity without deforming, because if the casing deforms, the bomb stops. And if the bomb stops, the target lives. The Air Force says the GBU-57 can penetrate 200 feet, roughly 60 meters, of standard Earth before detonating. Against reinforced concrete at 5,000 psi, the number drops to around 60 feet, 18 meters. And here's what makes that terrifying. The bomb's fusing system is intelligent. It reads the structure as it penetrates. It detects voids, chambers, corridors, open spaces, and it waits. It waits until it's inside the right room, and then it decides to exist. No bunker in history was ever designed to survive being detonated from within. Iran had 40 years, tens of billions of dollars, 80 meters of limestone, and an unshakable belief that the mountains would protect them. They had until morning. Here's what the Iranian commanders in the underground facility near Tehran expected that night. Nothing. Because for 40 years, nothing had come. Threats had come. Sanctions had come. Diplomatic notes and UN resolutions and strongly worded statements, those had all come, but nothing that actually mattered had ever made it through the rock above their heads. So the night shift ran the assembly lines. The Shahab components moved along their tracks. The Sejil solid fuel motors sat in their cradles, waiting for integration. Technicians in hard hats logged their outputs, drank their tea, argued about football. No one was looking up. There was no reason to look up. The GBU-57 doesn't announce itself with a whistle. It arrives as a pressure wave, a physical disruption in the air that the human nervous system registers as wrongness before the conscious mind can name it. By the time the brain forms the thought something is falling, the bomb has already entered the earth. 10 meters. Still moving. 20 meters. The casing screams against the rock but holds. 30 meters. The fuse detects a structural void ahead. A corridor, a room, a space where human beings built something they were proud of. 40 meters. 50. The fuse makes its decision. The assembly complex beneath the Tehran foothills, the facility that had taken years to carve, wire, pressurize, and staff, ceased to exist as a functional structure in approximately 4 seconds. Not because the bomb destroyed every cubic meter of rock above it, but because it destroyed the right cubic meters, the load-bearing points, the ventilation architecture, the pressure-sealed chambers where missile components sat in climate-controlled precision. That's the horror of a weapon with a smart fuse. It doesn't need to be everywhere. It just needs to be in the one place that matters. Because what happened beneath the Alborz foothills was not a single strike. It was the opening move of a sequenced, systematically planned supply chain destruction, executed across multiple sites, multiple time zones within Iran, within a window so compressed that no Iranian command authority could process what was happening fast enough to respond. The engine test facility at Isfahan had one job: to take solid fuel motors for Iran's Sejil and Imad missile families and push them to the limit before they were certified for deployment. Without this facility, motors couldn't be tested. Without testing, they couldn't be trusted. Without trust, they couldn't be deployed. Iran understood this, which is why they buried it. They buried it approximately 150 feet, around 45 meters, beneath reinforced earth, with concrete blast doors designed to resist overpressure events that would flatten a conventional building in milliseconds. At 02:31 a.m., a GBU-57 entered the earth above Isfahan's engine test chambers and disagreed with every engineering decision Iran had made about that structure. The secondary fires from the propellant stores burned for 6 hours. The engine test program, the beating heart of Iran's ballistic missile certification pipeline, burned with it. Dezful, Khuzestan Province, 02:44 a.m. This is where the doctrine of no repair revealed its full cruelty, because destroying a facility is one thing. What the operational planners had designed into this phase of epic fury was something colder, a denial of reconstitution. The principle that not only would the target be destroyed, but that any attempt to assess, repair, or recover would itself become a targeting opportunity. Within 40 minutes of the initial strikes on Dezful, Iranian engineering units arrived with heavy excavation equipment, bulldozers, crane trucks, emergency generators. Standard protocol: assess the damage, begin stabilization, keep the chain of command informed. The drones had been watching the approach roads for 2 hours. The excavation equipment lasted 11 minutes. The message delivered to every Iranian military logistics commander watching their screens that night was not tactical, it was psychological. We are not just destroying what you built, we are destroying your ability to want to rebuild it. 20% of global petroleum consumption. Let that number sit for a moment. One choke point, 21 miles wide, 1/5 of the world's oil. China gets 37% of everything that flows through it. India, 14%. Japan, 11%, South Korea, 12%. Combined, nearly 3/4 of Hormuz crude goes to Asia. If Iran closed that strait, truly closed it, with mines and anti-ship missiles and coastal defense batteries and swarm boat tactics, the economic shockwave wouldn't stop at Asian stock markets. It would move through every supply chain, every inflation index, every fuel pump on the planet within 72 hours. This was Iran's ultimate deterrent. The threat that underpinned every negotiation, every confrontation, every moment of regional posturing for 3 decades. By 03:15 a.m., the coastal missile storage network near the strait was gone. Not degraded, not suppressed. Gone. The Tomahawk cruise missiles launched from a submerged attack submarine somewhere in the Gulf of Oman had entered their terminal guidance phase 17 minutes earlier, threading through the terrain at wavetop altitude, arriving at coordinates that existed in their memory chips as precise three-dimensional addresses. And simultaneously, more than 150 Iranian naval vessels, patrol boats, fast attack craft, the coastal swarm fleet that Tehran had spent years building specifically to threaten Hormuz, were engaged by precision munitions across the Persian Gulf. By dawn, the Iranian Navy's ability to threaten international shipping through the Strait of Hormuz had been reduced to something that could be described in one word: memory. There is a phenomenon in military theory called command paralysis. It's not the moment your headquarters is destroyed, it's the moment your headquarters is intact. Your commanders are alive, your communications equipment is functional. But the picture of the battlefield has become so catastrophically different from everything you planned for that the decision-making process simply freezes. Because every decision requires a model of reality. And Iran's model of reality, the model built over 40 years, reinforced by doctrine, by investment, by political necessity, said that the mountains were safe. When the first damage reports began filtering up the Iranian chain of command in the pre-dawn hours of March 28th, the psychological impact was not simply the loss of facilities, it was the loss of a worldview. The commanders who received those reports didn't just learn that certain buildings had been destroyed. They learned that the fundamental premise of Iranian strategic deterrence, the premise that had shaped procurement decisions, training doctrine, budget allocations, and political messaging for an entire generation, was false. The mountains were not safe. The depth was not protection. The 40 years of concrete and secrecy and sacrifice, tunnels dug by hand, engineers who gave careers and health to the program, billions of dollars diverted from hospitals and roads and universities, had produced something that could be negated in a single night by weapons that hadn't existed when the first tunnels were dug. By the time the sun rose over the Iranian plateau on March 28, 2026, the missile assembly pipeline near Tehran, destroyed. The engine testing infrastructure at Isfahan, burning. The coastal anti-ship arsenal threatening Hormuz, eliminated. The excavation crews sent to assess damage at Dezful, gone. And somewhere in a command bunker that was still physically intact, Iranian military leadership was trying to answer a question that had no good answer. If the mountains couldn't protect us, what can? There is a word that gets used carelessly in discussions of military power: surgical. Politicians use it to make war sound clean. Analysts use it to sound precise. Critics use it as sarcasm, because wars are never clean, never truly precise, never truly surgical. But in the pre-dawn hours of March 28, 2026, the third phase of Operation Epic Fury was something that genuinely deserved that word. Because what came next wasn't about destroying Iran's military capacity, it was about severing Iran's nuclear future permanently without starting a catastrophe that would make the cure worse than the disease. The planners at U.S. Strategic Command had spent years, not months, not weeks, years, modeling Iran's nuclear supply chain not as a collection of buildings to be destroyed, but as a biological system to be interrupted at its most irreplaceable points. They identified three. Cut 1. Yazd Province, Aero 3:22 AM, yellow cake. It sounds almost harmless. A pale yellow powder, uranium oxide, U-308, that looks like something you'd find in an industrial warehouse, not something that ends civilizations. But yellow cake is where the nuclear weapons pipeline begins. Without it, there is no UF-6 for the centrifuges at Natanz and Fordo to spin. Without UF-6, there is no enrichment. Without enrichment, there is no weapons-grade uranium. Without yellow cake, the entire downstream chain is running on borrowed time. The strike at Yazd didn't need to be the heaviest of the night. It needed to be the most permanent. The processing chambers collapsed inward. The storage tanks ruptured. The milling equipment, imported over decades through networks of front companies designed specifically to circumvent international sanctions, became rubble. Replacing what was destroyed at Yazd wouldn't take months, it would take years. And that assumed Iran could find the supply chains, the equipment, the international financing, and the political space to rebuild. none of which would exist in the aftermath of what this night had made visible to the world. Cut 2. Iraq Heavy Water Reactor, Aero 3:41 a.m. Here is what makes the Iraq reactor different from everything else struck that night. At Fordo and Natanz, the primary concern was highly enriched uranium, stopping the centrifuges, collapsing the enrichment halls, denying Iran the fissile material pathway through uranium-235. At Iraq, the concern was entirely different. It was about closing the plutonium door before Iran could open it again. But here is where the surgical precision of Phase 3 reveals its true complexity. Because Iraq wasn't just an Iranian facility. Russian engineers from Rosatom, the state nuclear energy corporation, had been present at the site as part of the internationally supervised redesign program. Their presence wasn't incidental, it was structural, and their safety was, in the cold mathematics of strategic planning, a geopolitical constraint as binding as any treaty. 72 hours before the first bomb fell at Tehran, the Rosatom engineering team at Arak received what was officially described as a routine administrative instruction to temporarily relocate to the Russian consular compound in Tehran for a scheduled equipment inventory review. It wasn't routine. Every Russian engineer was out of the facility before midnight. No radiation leak was detected, not because the planners got lucky, because getting lucky was never the plan. The plan was to know the facility well enough, its containment architecture, its radiation shielding, its structural failure modes, to strike it the way a surgeon removes a tumor, completely without touching what surrounds it. That is what surgical means. Cut 3. Bushehr, 04:03 a.m. This one required a different kind of precision entirely. Because Bushehr wasn't a weapons facility, it was a power plant. And power plants, even ones in adversary nations, carry legal, moral, and environmental constraints that don't apply to missile assembly lines. The objective at Bushehr wasn't to destroy the reactor, it was to strand it. To eliminate the stored fuel reserves, the transfer infrastructure, the maintenance supply chains, so that even if the reactor physically survived, it could not operate, could not be refueled, could not be used as political leverage or practical energy generation in the months of pressure that would follow. By 4:15 a.m., the Bushehr fuel supply chain was neutralized. The reactor dome stood intact against the pre-dawn sky, but the infrastructure that gave it purpose was gone. RAF Fairford, a Royal Air Force station in southwest England that most British civilians couldn't find on a map, and that every Iranian military planner knew by name. RAF Fairford is one of only 2 bases in all of Europe capable of hosting all 3 of the U.S. Air Force's long-range strategic bombers, the B-1B Lancer, the B-2 Spirit, and the B-52 Stratofortress. Forces News. Its runway stretches nearly 10,000 feet. Its fuel systems were upgraded in the largest NATO-funded airfield construction project since the Cold War. Its 2 climate-controlled hangars were built specifically to house the B-2's radar-absorbing skin in the English humidity. By late March 2026, RAF Fairford was hosting 15 B-1B Lancers and 6 B-52H Stratofortresses, one of the largest concentrations of strategic bombers in recent American military history, all operating as part of Operation Epic Fury, targeting Iranian missile infrastructure. Think about what that means operationally. Using Fairford rather than flying directly from the continental United States would halve the time those bombers needed to spend in the air and cut fuel costs dramatically. And more importantly, it meant sortie rates that a transatlantic mission profile simply cannot sustain. From Fairford, a B-52 can reach Iranian targets, deliver its payload, and return to a ready state faster than the Iranian command structure can process what just happened and formulate a response. This is the logistics dimension of Epic Fury that the dramatic footage of underground explosions tends to obscure. Because a military campaign isn't just the moment of destruction, it's the ability to sustain that destruction, day after day, night after night, without the operational tempo degrading, without the enemy being given the breathing room to adapt. B-1B bombers operating from RAF Fairford struck Iranian ballistic missile production facilities, underground command centers, and mobile launchers across Iranian territory in a rhythm that gave Tehran no window of normalcy. No morning where the damage assessment teams could work undisturbed. No night where the command bunkers could assume the skies above them were empty. The machine at Fairford never slept, and Iran never stopped knowing it. Here is the strategic logic that underpinned every targeting decision of Operation Epic Fury. And understanding it is the difference between seeing this as a military operation and understanding it as a geopolitical instrument. The objective was never the total destruction of Iran. The objective was the creation of conditions under which Iran's leadership would conclude, through rational calculation, that continuing to resist was more costly than accepting negotiated terms. This is called coercive strategy, and it is considerably more difficult than simply bombing things. The operational window that American planners had designed for was 4 to 6 weeks of sustained high-intensity operations, long enough to exhaust Iran's ability to reconstitute damaged systems, long enough to make the economic and political cost of continued resistance unsustainable, but short enough to prevent the kind of entrenched conflict that drags superpowers into generational commitments. 4 to 6 weeks of Fairford, 4 to 6 weeks of submarines, 4 to 6 weeks of carrier strike groups cycling through the Gulf, 4 to 6 weeks of the mountain being a wound instead of a shield. 3 days after the opening strikes, Iran issued what it called its 6-point framework for cessation of hostilities. The demands were, on the surface, maximalist: war reparations, the closure of American military bases throughout the region, international prosecution of senior U.S. military commanders, recognition of Iranian sovereignty over its nuclear program. The analysts watching that press conference from Langley, from the Pentagon, from Fort Meade, they weren't reading the 6 points, they were reading the body language of a system under catastrophic stress attempting to perform normalcy, because those 6 demands had one function and one function only: domestic political survival. When a government's military deterrent has been destroyed, when the mountains it told its people were inviolable have been violated, when the strategic depth it built over 40 years has been negated in a single night, you cannot simply announce that reality to your population. You announce demands instead. You perform defiance until you can negotiate surrender and call it something else. Here is what nobody in the American press briefings said explicitly. And here is what every defense ministry on earth understood immediately. Operation Epic Fury was not just about Iran. 3 locations, 3 countries, 3 separate strategic doctrines built on the same foundational premise that Iran had just tested to destruction. That depth equals immunity, that going underground means going beyond reach, that the mountain is the ultimate guarantee. The Chinese naval architects who designed the Yulin submarine caverns did so with a specific threat assessment in mind, that surface facilities were vulnerable, but a tunnel with 30 meters of granite above it was not. 30 meters. The GBU-57 penetrates 60. The Russian strategic planners who built Yamantau, whatever Yamantau actually contains, built it to survive a nuclear exchange, to be the place from which Russian leadership could direct warfighting after everything on the surface had been incinerated. Its depth is classified, its purpose is classified, but its existence is the physical embodiment of a belief that if you go deep enough, you survive anything. The North Korean engineers who hollowed out the Hamgyong mountain range, creating launch facilities and storage complexes that can absorb everything short of a direct nuclear strike, did so because Kim Jong-un understood correctly that his survival depended on his adversaries believing his assets were unreachable. On the morning of March 28, 2026, every strategic planner in Beijing, in Moscow, in Pyongyang opened their morning intelligence brief and found the same image: a mountain with holes in it, and a weapon that had made those holes from the outside. The USS Tripoli, LHA-7, is not technically an aircraft carrier. The US Navy classifies it as an amphibious assault ship, but that classification is almost misleading in its modesty. At nearly 850 feet long, displacing over 44,000 tons with a flight deck covering roughly 9 acres, the Tripoli operates F-35B Lightning II stealth fighters from its deck, MV-22 Osprey tiltrotors, attack helicopters, and beneath that flight deck, in the spaces that make it genuinely different from a carrier, it carries something no aircraft carrier carries. On March 28, 2026, U.S. Central Command confirmed that the USS Tripoli had entered its area of responsibility, serving as flagship for the Tripoli Amphibious Ready Group and the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit, bringing approximately 3,500 sailors and Marines to the region. 3,500. Not a peacekeeping force, not a humanitarian mission. An MEU, a Marine Expeditionary Unit, is a self-contained combined arms organization. Ground combat, aviation combat, logistics, command and control. The full spectrum of what it means to project American military power from the sea onto a shore. Their mission had not been publicly announced. It didn't need to be. In the language of military signaling, the Tripoli's presence in those waters said something that no press briefing could say more clearly. The conversation about who controls this strait is over. The conversation about what happens next begins on our terms, and we have brought 3,500 people to make sure the terms are heard. For 40 years, the underground doctrine was the answer to a specific question. How do you protect what you cannot afford to lose from an adversary you cannot defeat in open conflict? Iran's answer was, go deep, go dark. Let the mountain be your argument. It was a rational answer. It was a sophisticated answer. It was an answer built from concrete and rock and the labor of engineers who believed they were making their country safe forever. Operation Epic Fury didn't just defeat that answer, it retired the question. Because the next country that considers building its deterrence strategy around depth and concealment, the next military planner who draws a facility schematic and decides that 60 meters of earth is an acceptable margin of safety, will have to account for what happened to Iran's mountains in a single night. The mountains are still standing, but they are no longer a guarantee. They are a lesson, and the world is still deciding what to learn from it.